Hi, everybody. I am Tim Kring, and I am a professional storyteller, which means that I sometimes get paid to tell stories, sometimes being the optimum word. Today, I want to talk a little bit about a personal journey of discovery. It's a journey about my own path as a storyteller. It starts with me working in Hollywood and in traditional forms, mainly in television, and how it led me to explore what my friend Brian Seth Hurst coined as social benefit storytelling, which is a chance for an audience to insert themselves into a story and by doing so see real positive results as a result. And then I want to talk a little bit about a project that we completed a few years ago called Conspiracy for Good that really embodies this idea of social benefit storytelling. Now, my journey began when times were a little easier in terms of reaching an audience, certainly easier than what we discussed this morning about reaching an audience. I was raised in the 60s when there was just enough social consciousness in my family to make me want to believe that I was going to grow up to do something meaningful with my life. And I was always interested in these very big questions of why we were here and what was the meaning of life. I even ended up getting a degree in religious studies, but as you know, there wasn't a lot of buck in that racket. I thankfully also was interested in photography and cinematography, and I ended up going to graduate school at the crosstown rival here. Sorry, Terry. When I got out of school, I worked for a few years in production, mainly in camera crews and that sort of thing. And after a few years, I had the opportunity to get into the union. And it was then that I decided that I didn't really want to punch a clock for a living. And a bunch of my friends were, at the time, starting to break into Hollywood by writing screenplays and entering at a fairly high level. And so I decided to sit down and write a script, which I did, and I got an agent from that script, and the agent got me about 100 pitch meetings, and from those pitch meetings, I ended up getting my first job writing for a talking car on a show called Knight Rider, which an auspicious beginning, but it was a foot in the door, and that was 28 years ago, if I can believe it. And the truth is, I've never stopped working as a writer ever since. And the early part of my career, or for the first half of my career, actually, I literally took every job that I could get. There was no fork in the road. There were no options of whether to turn something down. I literally took everything that I could get. If somebody wanted me to write a teen comedy, a horror film, a Disease of the Week movie, it didn't matter. I took the job. I even made myself a little business card, which is a completely ridiculous thing to do because no writer in Hollywood has a business card. And I had a little cartoon head on it with a little light bulb over the head. And I wrote, Tim Kring, professional writer, I'll write anything. And the truth was, as silly as that was and as ridiculous as that was, it was also very true to how I was running my so-called career. And after about a dozen years of this, I finally did have one of these forks in the road where I had an option as to whether to write this project or that project. And while it's a high-class problem to have, for me it was kind of devastating. I was completely ill-equipped to make any kind of decision at all. And it was then that I started to think, if I only had some kind of unifying theory of everything about my career or some underlying theme that I was trying to explore, something that I really was, that could give me a true north to guide me in decisions like this. But I couldn't really think of what that was, and thankfully neither of those jobs came through to begin with. And the year was 2001, and I actually had a show on the air called Crossing Jordan. It was the first season of the show. We were just in production the first season of the show when 9/11 happened. And we took one day off. We took September 11th off and stumbled back to work the next day in a kind of a fog. And I remember being struck by this contrast that this make-believe world that we were creating with actors saying lines that weren't their own words and on sets that were fake, and the contrast between that and this very genuine tragedy, this suffering that had sort of gripped the entire world. And I started to realize that I needed to say something about this. I wasn't sure what that was that I wanted to say. But I sat down and wrote a script. It was called Miracles and Wonders. And it was you'd never guess that the script had anything to do with 9/11. It was a story about a daisy chain of events that connect a seemingly random group of people with one another. And in that script, I sort of came to realize that the underlying theme of the script was interconnectivity. And I found in this theme something that I really was very passionate about and would end up being kind of the blueprint for the next dozen years of my career. And anybody that knows my work has seen this theme in the last dozen years in that. Certainly Touch, my current show on television, is very much about this. It's all about the idea of interconnectivity. It's literally the premise of the show. But it was my previous show, Heroes, that really began to explore this idea. Heroes is a story about a disparate group of people that come together and find one another to save the world. And we took a very postmodern, kind of post-9/11 view of saving the world, that heroes weren't going to come from the institutions that we'd all grown up with. They were going to be from your next-door neighbor, or the geek that is in the sea of cubicles that you work with, or the cheerleader that you dismiss as vapid. So let's take a look at that. Heroes was designed to be a multi-platform universe that could actually connect to the audience where they live. I started to think about the kind of show that would capture a zeitgeist. How do these characters from different parts of the world come together to do something great? It was not just the size and scale of the show and the big, broad canvas that we had. The part that really connected the audience was this underlying message of hope and interconnectivity and this wish fulfillment that even the most ordinary among us could be destined for something great. In order to reach this audience, we had to tell story where they lived on multiple platforms. We started allowing that fan base to create content, to push content to us, and it was really at that time that the light bulb went off for me. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could take that idea and actually roll it out into the real world? So this idea of creating a relationship with the audience by telling story across multiple platforms really created this incredible dynamic relationship, this two-way street that we had between us and our audience. We told story to them, they told story right back. And I started to think what would happen if we took this underlying theme of saving the world and roll it out into the real world. And this is where the idea for Conspiracy for Good came from. In a nutshell, what we wanted to do was have a narrative that the audience could ride inside of, and by using the tools of sort of multi-user online gaming and combining it with the power of social networking and social media, create a narrative that would have real good in the real world. Now, the whole idea of the Conspiracy for Good is it's born out of the idea of an ancient secret society called Spira. Spira has been around for the last 2,000 years. You just didn't realize it was there. It's quietly living in the shadows, responsible for all of the major philanthropic, philosophical, political, technological, artistic, scientific advancements of the last 2,000 years. And of course, the signs have been there the whole time, but you didn't have the ability to see them until now. And now with modern technology and looking back in a kind of revisionist way, we can see that they were actually there the whole time. And this modern idea of Spira is still very much with us. And the whole idea of the Conspiracy for Good, the mission statement, is that it's an immersive social movement that inspires people through story, gaming, and human connection to generate positive change in the world. So the idea was to create a pilot that we could start this off with. And we did that with the help of a big tech giant, Nokia. And the goal was to to connect sort of two seemingly unconnectable ideas, the idea of a big fan base of a narrative like Heroes, and connect it to a cause. In this case, it was the Room to Read, which is a very worthy cause that builds libraries in underdeveloped parts of the world. And the whole idea was to create a narrative that would live all around you all the time for a 3-month period, roll out over multiple platforms, online, on mobile, and Facebook and Twitter, and eventually roll out into the streets of London, which was our sort of game board for the final part of this narrative. And what we do, there were 130 people working on this project for 18 months in 5 different countries. And what we did to start this narrative was introduce the world to our bad guy, which was an evil multinational corporation called Blackwell Briggs, that's sort of a part Halliburton, kind of part BP, kind of, terrible, involved with everything evil kind of company. And we created a Facebook presence for them. We created a website, a social presence for them. We had a Twitter account where Karl Rove was one of our first Twitter followers, proving that all bad guys find one another somehow. And our story actually leaked out in a very small, innocuous way. You would find, let's say, a clue of a Morse code on a document, and you would take that Morse code and find a translator and translate it to discover that there was a clue there for you. And when you found that clue, you would follow the instructions and click on the badge and discover that there was a hidden message there for you. Now, that message was then crowdsourced, discovered that perhaps there was a coordinate someplace, and in this case, the coordinates led you on a journey to an exotic city, Stockholm in this case, where we literally had our participants out in the streets trying to find some hidden clues that we had left for them. This is an actual video of people finding these clues that we had left on the streets of Stockholm for them. This was some Blackwell Briggs documents that would be 3 months later prove to bring down this evil corporation. Now, I've spoken sort of theoretically about this, so let me show you a little bit about the project.
Be on your guard.
In 2010, London witnessed the global launch of the Conspiracy for Good, a new form of entertainment called social benefit storytelling, which allowed people's participation inside a story to do real good in the real world. Released across the web, mobile and music, it became the most ambitious cross-platform story ever launched. And this is the story they told. Recording artist Nadira X puts her career on hold to build a library for an elementary school in Zambia. But British-based multinational Blackwell Briggs halts construction of the library to make way for an oil pipeline. Nadira uncovers a document proving the company's claim to the land is false and sets out on an epic journey to London to expose their fraudulent actions. Moved by Nadira's mission, people from around the world joined an ancient secret society known as the Conspiracy for Good. To help her cause, they watched her story across 21 webisodes as they guide her in real time from Zambia to London, deciphering clues and hacking the Blackwell Briggs website. When Nadira arrives in London, the action bursts from the web and onto the streets, with 4 weeks of real-world gameplay and live theatre, where conspirators take part in digital scavenger hunts to solve the story's mystery and celebrate the day's action with secret underground concerts. In the end, urgent calls via social media networks result in flash mobs that overwhelm security forces and topple Blackwell's corrupt CEO. And to complete Nadira's mission, the audience used in-story tools to help her build a real library in Zambia, $1 and one book at a time.
You can't stop me. No, you can't stop me. If you're not a man. You can't stop me. Not at all. You can't stop me.
The Conspiracy for Good. Are you a member?
So the success of this project was really its groundbreaking nature. It proved that this idea of creating a narrative that people could live inside of is a really enormously powerful way to get people out of their homes and into the streets and trying to make a real difference in the world. And the Conspiracy for Good continues today, and I may be tapping each and every one of you on the shoulder at some point here in the very near future to help out. But if I have a message today at all, it's that I think it's, as we talked about this morning, it's not just about content. I think it's the idea that we are all storytellers. And we all of us that have a presence in social media and Facebook and Twitter, we now have the tools to actually tell our story, or at least to become a part of somebody else's story. I think that the whole idea of this access to the audience that is exploding is so important and so exciting for a storyteller like me. It gives me sort of a smorgasbord of mix and match ways and platforms to actually reach an audience. For me, it's about relevance, and that's not just the word relevant as in staying relevant, keeping up with the technology and keeping up with things. It's about being relevant. It's about seeing yourself as a part of a solution, seeing your contribution as having meaning in the world. And as I said, this is a personal journey of mine, but I welcome all of you to join me on that journey. Thank you very much.